April 18, 1942, 16 American bombers roared off the deck of an aircraft carrier. Something no one had ever seen before. Their destination? Tokyo. Their mission? Do the impossible. And for most of the crews, there was no plan to come back. This was the Doolittle Raid, and it was one of the boldest stunts of World War II. Let's rewind. It's late 1941. Japan had just attacked Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet. In the months that followed, Japan seemed unstoppable, sweeping across Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and the Pacific Islands. In America, morale was at rock bottom. Newspapers were filled with grim headlines, and citizens worried that the war was already lost. President Roosevelt knew the country needed a symbolic punch, something to prove Japan wasn't invincible. And that's when an audacious idea was born: attack Japan itself. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was the man for the job. He wasn't just any pilot, he was a daredevil aviator, a test pilot, and an engineer who had set speed records and even pioneered instrument flying. If anyone was crazy enough to dream up a plan like this, it was Doolittle. The concept was simple on paper, insane in reality. Launch medium-sized bombers off an aircraft carrier, hit Japan, and then keep flying west until they reached friendly territory in China. Easy, right? Except for one small problem. No one had ever launched bombers that size from a carrier deck before. The U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces picked the B-25 Mitchell bomber for the job. Crews were trained in secret, learning how to take off in as little as 500 feet of runway. Pilots practiced endlessly, mastering the art of coaxing a heavy bomber into the air before the deck ran out. The bombers were stripped down to save weight, loaded with extra fuel tanks, and fitted with special modifications. Even then, the plan was risky. The aircraft carriers couldn't recover them. They'd have to fly until fuel ran out, then bail out or crash land. For the crews, it was a one-way ticket. On April 18, 1942, the USS Hornet carried the bombers into the Pacific. 16 aircraft lined the deck, their propellers spinning, crews ready. But before they reached the planned launch point, a Japanese patrol boat spotted the task force. Fearing the mission would be compromised, Doolittle made the call. Launch early, more than 600 miles from Japan. That meant less fuel, and even worse odds of reaching China. At 8:20 a.m., Doolittle himself took the first bomber down the deck. Against all expectations, the plane lifted into the air. One by one, the rest followed. Witnesses said it was a sight unlike anything ever seen before. Bombers lumbering off a carrier like circus acts, defying physics. The bombers roared over Japan in broad daylight. Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, factories, military facilities, and oil tanks were struck. The physical damage was limited, but the psychological effect was massive. Japanese civilians, for the first time, heard American engines overhead. The myth of Japan's invulnerability was shattered, but the real danger began after the bombs fell. None of the planes had enough fuel to make it to their planned safe zones. One by one, they crash-landed in China or ditched at sea. Some crews were saved by Chinese villagers. Others weren't so lucky. Several airmen were captured by the Japanese, with 3 executed and 1 dying in captivity. Doolittle himself bailed out over China, expecting to be court-martialed for losing all his planes. Instead, he was hailed as a national hero. In America, newspapers exploded with the story. At last, Japan had been hit back. Morale soared. Roosevelt even hinted that the bombers had come from Shangri-La, keeping Japan guessing. For Japan, it was humiliating. The attack forced the military to recall units to defend the home islands and rethink strategy. Some historians argue the raid played a role in Japan's decision to push toward Midway, where just 2 months later they suffered a catastrophic defeat. Doolittle received the Medal of Honor, promoted to Brigadier General. His men were celebrated, honored for their bravery. For years after the war, survivors of the raid gathered annually, known as the Doolittle Raiders, sharing a special bond that only comes from flying an impossible mission together. Today, the Doolittle Raid is remembered not just as a military operation, but as a message. At America's lowest point in World War II, it proved that the U.S. could fight back, and that sometimes the boldest gambles pay off. So next time you hear someone say Mission Impossible, remember the men who flew heavy bombers off a carrier deck, bombed Tokyo, and changed the course of a war. Don't just skim the highlights. Stick around for more deep dives into history's wildest battles, blunders, and legends. Subscribe, because here at Mission Historian, the past is anything but boring.